today is going to be in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 to 10. It says, "He entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, 'Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house tonight.' So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled, 'He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner.' And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, 'Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold.' And Jesus said to him, 'Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost.'" Amen.
So I love that passage, and I love that story. I think it's a great story to tell little kids. I was telling my two little boys that story this morning. I was telling them that Daddy is going to preach in the Knox chapel. They both go to WA, so they thought it was their chapel initially, and they were very excited to see me. I had to explain, no, it's a different chapel. So I told them a little bit about the story, and my older son, who's 4, Andrew, he said, "Well, I'm a bit like Zacchaeus because I love climbing in trees too." And he said, "I climb really high because I want to see Jesus." And I'm a terrible dad, so I said, "No, it's because you're a monkey and you like climbing high." He said, "Well, that too." It's a great text, though, and it's a great story. It's very compelling. It reminds us of something that we need to be reminded of over and over and over, which is that Jesus Christ, the Son of Man, came to seek and save the lost. Now, I have to tell you that I find the passage particularly compelling to me personally because I have to admit to you that I am one of the lost. Now, I'm not making a dramatic confession, don't worry. I'm not doing that terrible pastor ploy of making myself vulnerable to you. If you ever hear a pastor say that, by the way, he's usually about to humble brag. I'm not doing that. I'm just stating a fact, which is that I have for most of my life found myself terribly and horribly lost. Since I was a child, I've had this experience of finding myself in a particular place and wondering, where am I? And how did I get here? And how do I get out of here? These are not the Ravi Zacharias existential questions, okay? It's not, where am I and where am I going? It's, why am I in a Wendy's parking lot? It doesn't look like the right place at all. Shortly after my wife and I got married, I called her and I told her, I said, I think I'm lost and I need some help getting home. She's very good with directions, so she immediately said, "Well, just tell me where you are." I was like, "Well, that's the problem. I don't know where I am." So she said, well, tell me where you think you are. And I said, "I think I'm in the neighborhood. I think I'm actually circling our house. I just can't close the deal." Now, this is not the conversation that you want to have right after you got married. It doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in you. My family and I lived in Edinburgh, Scotland for 3 years while I was getting the PhD before coming here. And at that time, I was at least wise enough to know to always travel with my trusty GPS. So wherever I went in the city, I had my little GPS with me. His name is Andrew. He's very small, but he took after his mother. He's very, very good at directions. And so we would play a game, which would be, I would find myself terribly lost, and I would just sort of look down at Andrew. He would be in the little stroller that I pushed him in. You know, in Scotland, they have a great word for it. They call it a buggy. So he'd be in his little buggy, and I would look down and I would say, "Andrew, let's play a game. Let's pretend that Daddy is very lost, and you pretend to get Daddy home." Now, if you've met my son, you know he has a great vocabulary now. He always had a great vocabulary, and so he'd say, "Well, Daddy, we're on Bucklew Place, and so you need to go down to Causeway Side." So we go down to Causeway Side, and I'd say, "Where now?" "Take a right." So we'd take a right, and then as we came within sight of the flat, he'd say, "See, Daddy, our flat's right there." Now, I had to keep up the game, so I would say, "Good job, Andrew, you won the game, You pretended to help Daddy get home when Daddy was pretending to be lost." It always worked. I'm not sure that he always bought it. There were times where he was looking a little worried. The most recent time that I got horribly lost was right before I got this job. I've never told you all this, and I kind of hope I don't lose the job in the telling. It was right before I interviewed for this position. I had found out that Knox had an open position and was interviewing in Boston. And so I knew that I needed to, of course, fly on a plane from Edinburgh to Boston. This is very scary for me because when I'm on my own, I tend to get very lost, so I was very worried about that. But I was also worried about making a good impression. I knew many of you, I loved all of you, and was keen to make a smashing impression during my interview. And of course, one of the ways to do that is you dress to impress. So as I was packing my bags the night before getting on the plane, I realized that all of my dress socks, after 3 years of living as a student in Edinburgh, all my dress socks looked like they'd been grabbed by a badger and just chewed on. I mean, they were just covered in holes. And I thought, well, this isn't going to impress. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll just go without the socks. I'll wear the dress pants, kind of roll them up to my knees. I'll make an impression. I don't know that Knox is looking for that guy, though. So I had to go out and get socks. Now, this is where it got scary, because I made a couple key mistakes. As I left our flat, I left without my little GPS, and I realized that my iPhone was dead. I thought, well, I'm just going to the store for socks. It's okay. I was wrong. You see, I got on a bus that I thought was going to socks, and it was actually going to the rugby stadium. Now, Scotty Maynard lived in Edinburgh for years, and he knows just how far outside the city the rugby stadium is. I know that too now. You see, there's a point where the scenery just starts to change. You're looking out the window and you're thinking, well, I'm not really seeing city anymore. I'm seeing a lot of country. So finally, after quite some time, I'm ashamed to admit how long, I went up to the bus driver and I said, excuse me, I'm sorry, I've made a terrible mistake. I'm on the wrong bus, And then I kind of naively asked, when will this bus loop back around and come back to the city? And he gave this answer, which was very scary, but Scottish people have a way of telling you bad news in a way that makes you feel really bad. He just said, well, what day do you want to go back, lad? Well, that's not good. So I literally asked him to pull the bus over and stop the bus and let me out. And I got out on the side of the road and I walked on the road back to our flat. Now I say that quickly, like it happened quickly. It didn't. It took me hours of walking on foot to get back to our flat. And I met all sorts of lovely Scottish people along the way, none of whom knew where my house was. And Scottish people are nice. I'm pretty convinced that some of them actually wanted to know where my house was. They just didn't, it wasn't their fault. There's part of me when I get lost like that actually thinks that I deserve a sign on the side of the road that says, Josh's house, this way, maybe an arrow. I kept looking for that, but it wasn't to be found. It took me hours to walk home. And when I got back, my wife, who was obviously very worried at that point, asked me, she said, well, where have you been? And I said, where have I not been? I've been all over. Seen lots of things, talked to lots of people, but I don't have any socks. She said, are you going to go out and get them? And I said, no, because I don't know where I might end up if I go out again. And so I did my interview with my holy socks, and I got this position, and now I'm standing here telling you the story. I love this passage because it tells me, as somebody who is perpetually, horribly lost, that God came into the world to save people who are lost. That he actually gives us signs on the way that tell us where to go. Unlike my signs that never appeared telling me where my house is, he's given us those things. And Jesus Christ came into the world to save people who are dumb enough to get lost, like me. Let's pray. Our Father, we ask that you would help all of us in this room to look past the silly man telling the silly sermon, to see you, to see your grace to us in our lives, a grace that sent your Son into the world to seek and to save the lost, even people like me who are dumb enough to get lost looking for socks. We ask you, Father, that as we go about our business for the rest of this week, that you would be with us, that you would guide us in all of our tasks. We ask that we would remember that you are the God who saves the lost. We ask you all of these things for Jesus' sake. Amen.
Amen.